that we need to cover, because I'm going to do a review, because I think that there are folk here first time. First time? Yeah, so we'll do a review of what we've done, very quick one, but I guess we should do this anyway for the tape's sake, because one of the things that I really appreciate about this class, this one in particular, is the fact that I'm going to be covering materials that years past, when I've done things on the Moors, I never discussed them. Quite frankly, because I really didn't realize how important they really were. I have since learned their importance. And so today's class is going to deal with North Africa, ancient North Africa, dealing with the countries that we call Carthage and Numidia, which has a lot to do with the formation of who would come in to Europe. And what's important about this class is that it's not really that important for us to focus on Spain right now, because we know that through history that there was already evidence of Africans in Spain. There was evidence of Taharqa of the 25th dynasty in Spain. There is evidence of North Africans during the time of Hannibal and his father Hamilcar Barca. The idea of the study of this family, the Barca family, their position in the society itself. These are things that we're never really exposed to in our history classes or in our social studies classes. We're not introduced to how grand, how great these Numidians and these Carthaginians are. Of course, one of the sad things that I'll tell you now before the class is going to move through is that what brought Carthage down and eventually even Numidia, and what allowed Rome to take its place, was the fact that Africans were fighting amongst themselves. When you study it and you analyze it. Now, some people are a little uncomfortable with us discussing these types of things, but I'm very comfortable because we have to learn from the mistakes of the past. And one of the great mistakes that I have found that has happened in the past, and we can see it even now, is that in studying history from Kemet straight through, I have never observed peoples outside of African culture being able to defeat African people. What I've noticed is they take advantage of us infighting amongst ourselves. And they take advantage by separating us further in so many different ways. And there's evidence of this real live in our own history. For some of us lived through it. Some of us lived through it in the civil rights movement. Quite frankly, let's look at what happened with Malcolm. You know, a lot of that had to do with infighting. That agencies were able to come in between these great individuals and play on ego, play on mind, play with people's heads and separate them further, and which brought damage basically to both entities. One death and the other, its strength never really happened. So you're going to find that this is going to happen here also. And the more I get into our history, the more I see this constantly. And the more I see how people who don't have something, what they do is take advantage of those that do. And when those that do are able to be penetrated, then there's a serious situation. The opposite of that is evidence even as we're experiencing it right today, as we look at the political scene. There are people who are opposed to each other totally, but they realize that for the greater good of the survival of them as a group, they have to stick together. And so they'll go against everything they believe in simply to keep the group in place. That's smart. They're doing what they have to do. And they're doing it, well, it's fledgling now. It's in big trouble, but it won't last long. But still, they're able to hold on. And that face that they put on, that everything's all right, there's no infighting, there's none of this, there's none of that, You know, we're watching this and we're saying lies. Even they're calling each other lies. So this is a sociological point that I'd like to make today, more than anything else. But first, before we do, let's take care of something in terms of scheduling. Our last class was scheduled for June 17th, I believe. And I think situations, my scheduling is such that that's not going to be an easy day for me. So I'm asking, can we do June 11th, which is the week before, the Saturday before, June 11th, if that works with everybody. Yes, okay. So Greg, can we in place June 11th, and we'll ask Brother Dexter and those here if it's all right. If no, well then how about that Saturday, June 10th? June 10th, yes. If that's all right with the in-house and Minister Brown, is all right with you also? Okay, so June 10th will be our 6th class. First, let me ask, are there any questions of what we've done so far? Any questions, any comments that you'd like to just raise now? Things that you've gone across. Of course, for those of you who I'm sending the readings out to, as you can see, those essays that I'm sending you are larger than 25 megabytes. So I do apologize for sending them to you, maybe sometimes 8 and 9 at a time. But I have to break them up in fact, even the way I'm scanning them purposely under 25 so that I can get them to you. There's one that I've got to get to those that asked for the essays in the last class. When I spoke to Source of Knowledge Bookstore, they said the books that I've asked us to use, The Golden Age of the Moor and The African Presence in Early Europe, are either very hard to get or extremely expensive. And so I've asked permission and apologies to Dr. Van Sertima and others. And what I'm just doing is I'm scanning them and sending them out, because the information is just too important for you not to have. It's just too, and I'm asking for $30 for the process of scanning them and all that it takes. But the whole compilation of essays, I'm asking for $30. And you'll get them. Some of them I have to break up into 6 and 7 sections. If you have the books, it's fine. But if you don't have the books and you're having difficulty, and they're crazy expensive, and because there's only certain essays I'm asking us to read, it works out that maybe if I could get them to you the way I'm getting them to you would be better than you having to spend an enormous amount of money. Although I believe those books should be in our libraries. All the books that we have, Dr. Van Sertima's library should be. And I guess they know that. And that's why they charge the ridiculousness. I remember you had a celebration for Dr. Van Sertima, I believe, at Medgar Evers. Jan Carew was there.
Thousands came out.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
I was there.
Yeah.
It was quite an event. And I also remember that here in Newark, the last time I saw Dr. Van Sertima was at African Echoes here. It was the last time that I saw him. But his contributions to us is just phenomenal. Mm-hmm. You know, what he contributed to us, just opening up the entire way of looking at Africans in America. It never entered my mind. You know, and it's funny because when you're teaching and you think you know, and someone comes along with some information, it just takes you into another level. Please, brother.
Weren't you with us on the trip
Yes.
to Mexico?
I carried your bag sometimes. I used to help him carry his camera. Ralph Carter was there.
Mm-hmm. Of Good Times, in case nobody knows who
Ralph Carter, the actor in Good Times. Mm-hmm. He came, and we spent a good, 14 days?
Yeah, 2 weeks.
And it was phenomenal. In fact, it's up on YouTube. They Came Before Columbus is the DVD. Mm-hmm. But not just that, but what also Dr. Van Sertima did was that he brought together the finest minds in certain areas, like the African presence in early Europe, the African presence in early Asia, the golden age of the Moor, blacks in science. And he brought together the finest minds in those areas, and put it together in an encyclopedic form. He had one piece, Great African Thinkers, where he highlighted Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop. He had another, Great Black Women in Black Women in Antiquity. Yeah, essays on some of the finest, and even one of the essays that we're going to use today, dealing with Hatshepsut, very powerful. I'm sorry, not Hatshepsut, Hannibal. Because to understand Carthage, you have to understand the continuity, and that's what I'm trying to get us to begin to look at in our development of understanding how to study. And that's my great concern, is how to study. See, they keep telling us to study. Don't they tell us in school, study this, study that? But no one has ever taught us how to study. I'd like to do a class just on how to study. To me, I think it would be a phenomenal class just to study how to study. And that has nothing to do with the material that you're studying. It has to do with you understanding how your brain functions and how to connect the neurons to make sense and synthesis of the information. I think I did something on Bloom's taxonomy, talking about Bloom's taxonomy and the importance of understanding Benjamin Bloom's taxonomy. We'll do reviews, because I do know that there are certain folk that have not been here. So, I just want to focus on certain things while I'm giving you the content information. I also want to give you the methodologies of studying, the methodologies of learning this material. Because two of the classes, last class number 2, when we dealt with the Mediterranean, when I did the original 3-part series on the Moors, well, really 6-part series on, but when I did the original one, the impact of the Mediterranean wasn't really in my presentation. But since I did that, and you're talking about, wow, you're talking about the year 2000. The first piece that I did, the Moors, this was an overview on the Moors. And basically what I told the group was, you can't understand the Moors if you don't understand the Crusades. Now I'm telling you, you can't understand the Moors if you don't understand the Punic Wars. The Punic Wars, there were 3 of them that took place basically 200 BC on. And what is really important is the Barca family, of which Hannibal was going to be the son of Hamilcar Barca, is going to put up a resistance to the Romans coming in. See, the Romans are going to get into Egypt 30 BC, but the Romans are a threatening force up in the southern part of the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean Sea before even that. And again, see, these are the missing pieces that Dr. Van Sertima used to always talk about when he talked about how African history has been scattered. There was an explosion, and it sent the very nature of this information across the world. And in order for us to be able to regain this, we have to take this information and bring it back in and look at it holistically. And so while the Crusades are important, the Crusades really are the Punic Wars part 2. And I said, you cannot understand the position you find yourself in today. This is what I told the group back in end of 1999. You can't understand the position we find ourselves in as a people today if you don't understand the Moors. You can't understand the Moors if you don't understand the Crusades. Because that is why I say the danger of episodic history, of which I call corrective history. The traditional way of teaching history is not by you just knowing people, places, events that occurred. And I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. Corrective history, the way in which the Moors taught it, they taught corrective history. And again, the way in which it connects your neurons is very different from when you study episodic history, because in episodic history, what you're studying is episodes, okay? But there was a whole bunch of things that happened before that particular period in history that brought that into existence. But without you knowing that, the episode is looked at out of context. So that the way in which you're going to connect your neurons, there's a very good chance that if you don't learn it correctively, you're going to repeat that mistake again. Because you don't know what happened before. By that I mean this. The way I taught it according to the way the Board of Ed told me to teach it. But the way I taught it when I closed the door with the children was what could have happened between 1919 and 1939 that would have avoided World War II. It's a totally different way of studying history. It's called corrective history. Because every civilization that wishes to push itself higher and higher is always hoping never to repeat the same mistakes again. If anywhere in here I'm not making sense, please let me know and I'll just repeat what I'm saying. Because this becomes very important in terms of us understanding our history. Because part of what's happening to us is we're studying episodic history. We're studying episodes. And even though those episodes are great, many times, if you don't see it from a corrective perspective, if you don't see it from what's before, you'll never understand why that occurred. If you don't understand why that occurred, then everything else is going to follow. You'll never understand. Like I'm going to give you a corrective history statement made by Neely Fuller. Here's corrective history. He said, if you're looking at a world, and I'm going to paraphrase it, if you're looking at a world problem and you're not dealing with white supremacy, you ain't dealing with the problem. Think about that. Look at anything that's happening in the world, even today. Look at what's happening. What's at the core of that? Whether they're trying to build a wall or whether they're trying to keep Muslim people out, what's at the core of that problem? Because we've already found out that the great majority of people who overstay their visas, who are in this country so-called illegally, are people from Asia. We already know that. In fact, they've interviewed Asians that have said, I overstayed my visa. So what are they really attempting to do? And in episodic history, you can't see that. So that's why these classes that we're doing here that allows me to look at the Moors, I can take you back now. Because Dr. Phil Valentine and I alternated presentations in Brooklyn. I think the first one I did was November of 1999. And then he did December of 99. I did January of 2000, and we went back 3 times each. And basically that's the DVDs that I have now on the Crusades. And a lot of geography. As you can see, these classes, I've had a lot of geography. Because I need this, I need to ground you in space and time. Because that's part of understanding corrective history. You have to know where it happened, and you have to know when it happened.
Right.
You see? And that's space and time. Time is history, and space is geography. And before you even talk about Moors that would go into Europe, which, episodically speaking, we would never think on that level. The great majority of peoples of African descent still see the Moors as a people of, let's say, what we perceive to be non-African. The great majority. When we think of the Moors, we think of Omar Sharif. You know, ain't nothing wrong with Omar Sharif, but he's not who the Moors were. That's just history. So before we even get there, we have to start talking about the human family and the origin of life in Africa, and that was our first class. Go all the way back. Let's go all the way back and understand how every human being, there's only one race, and that's the human race. And this race was conceived and born, nurtured, sustained, educated, civilized, technologized, and as Dr. Clarke say, after Africans got their show together, then they took it on the road. So they brought a technology with them wherever they went. So when we see pyramids all around the world, and when we see different things all around the world, people just didn't decide, oh, hey, let's all build pyramids. That technology was brought there, whether it was in America, or whether it was in Asia, whether it was in Sri Lanka, whether it was in India, whether it was building of the Great Wall. You can go to parts of Southern Africa and you can see the same technology that built the Great Wall of China built the Great Zimbabwe Wall. It's there to be seen. And when we think of Zimbabwe, a lot of times we think of the Monomotapa Empire. When we think of the Monomotapa Empire, we think of a particular geographic location. No, that stretched across the entire southern part of the African continent. When you think about Southern Africa, again, episodic history. You study the Monomotapa Empire. But to really, truly understand what was going on in Southern Africa, you have to understand that it wasn't geographically located in a particular area, although they have uncovered that. The reason why that's been uncovered is because when Europeans went there, they uncovered it. But since then, there have been other great buildings that have been unearthed in Southern Africa that stretch across the entire belt of South Africa. In Nigeria, you have Eredo, E-R-E-D-O, which is a city that's 400 square miles and 100 miles in diameter. Imagine a city that stretches from here to Washington, D.C.
Wow.
The city was up and running 1000 A.D. But if the city was up and running 1000 A.D., how long did it take to build a city like that? And then the time that it took to build a city like that, who were the first thinkers that laid out the groundwork to build that city? And then you got to go back and figure who was the first person that thought, say, let's build a city. So what I am saying is that the very beginnings of Eredo were occurring concurrently with those that were building the pyramids in Kemet.
Right.
The same with Southern Africa. You can go to parts of Central Africa, to Luango and to Cuba, to Luongo in Central Africa, and you have phenomenal cities existing, with governments that are governing, with economic systems that are trading, with communication systems that are, in effect, going on. But because we've not been exposed to this, our minds have been episodically placed so that we just study in episodes.
Right.
So we'll see an Eredo, or we'll see a Monomotapa Empire, but never ask, how many thousands of years did it take to do this? Forget about building it. Just thinking about the math, science, and technology and engineering that went into it. So we have to go back to the origin of life in Africa to begin to put into place an understanding of an African people, unlike the African people that they wish to push in front of us. There's a brilliant brother, Chika Okua, out of Atlanta. I recommend you go to his Facebook page if you get a chance, C-H-I-K-E. Last name is Akua, A-K-U-A. He's a brilliant scholar, educator out of Atlanta. And he talks about the difference between an authentic and an alien culture. And what he does in his 4-minute and 6-second presentation on Facebook is that he talks about the authenticity of African greatness. The idea, and I'll tell you right now how many children I've seen. And like, my thing was, I used to get a kick out of it because I used to say, I am a black nerd. Because in our educational system, there are many children who are was saying or believing that to be intelligent is to be acting white.
I used to tell my daughter that. And she speaks too white. Like, and she said, no, it isn't. They said, you can hear the apostrophe in her teeth. And I'm like,
Absolutely.
what is that? And so she started speaking Ebonics, and I'm like, don't do that. Don't dumb yourself down to fit in.
Yeah.
So that is true.
They push this idea on us, and we buy into it because of our image of who we are as a people. So this authentic culture is a culture of success. Success. You're successful. That's authentic. And an alien culture is some of the things that we see some of us saying and doing, and that they're sending that around the country to make it seem like that is what peoples of African descent are. Mm-hmm. They're creating that image. And it's not until we really understand who we are as a people and go back in time to be able to see exactly what we've accomplished and what we've done with no one else around. We did this by ourselves and for ourselves for thousands of years,
It's true.
if not millions.
Yeah.
It was the way we did it. So when people hear about the Moors going into Spain, they say, "Wow, this is it." Come on, that ain't authentic. That's alien. So our first class had to go back to the origins of the human family. The second class was a class that I presented on the Mediterranean, because it becomes very important to understand the Mediterranean. So we looked at the Mediterranean. This. Okay. And I also listed the countries of the Mediterranean. That also became important. And some of the countries that we know of that's along the Mediterranean Sea, which is very important because when you look at the map and then you look at these countries, the movement of African people into this part of the world showed the fact that even today we're looking at certain places. So some of the countries that are bordering the Mediterranean Sea would be France, Monaco, Italy, Slovenia, which is interesting, Croatia, Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, Syria, Israel, Lebanon, Libya, Malta, Tunisia, Morocco, the Mediterranean Sea covers more than 1 million square miles, about 1% of the Earth's surface. At its widest point, the sea spans 990 miles through although most areas are narrow. Now, what becomes important is that I didn't cover the Mediterranean before, looking at the Moors. But with the last class that we had and the class that we're going to have today, which is going to look at the development of North Africa from the most ancient peoples, Amantes, you're going to begin to see how this area was fertile with great civilizations. They had great things going on. Lively trade. These were a people that existed before the Sahara existed. That they had developed civilizations and cultures and ways of living. And they had everything in place. And so it becomes important that as we're looking, before we even get into Spain, because you see, next class, the 4th class, and the 5th class, and the 6th class, then we're going to delve into the Moors, the Africans that went in. But we have to understand who these Moors are. And we have to understand that Moor, from what I'm looking at, from the work of J.A. Rogers and Jose Pimento Bay, the golden age of the Moor, you're dealing with an African people who happen to be called Moors. But the word Moor gets caught up on them as if they are a specific, unique nation, as opposed to being African people that come from various parts of North Africa and Northwest Africa. You will have people, and I'll show you the Almoravid Dynasty, which was the 2nd dynasty that was in Spain. The Almoravid is going to have people from all parts of West Africa, from Senegal to Ghana to Nigeria, Dahomey, Benin. These are going to be African people. So what it's like if you came to the United States today and you were to speak of, let's say, African people. Well, in African people, you're going to have a lot of different nations of African people. Mm-hmm. You know, you're going to have, of course, you're going to have the original African people that were here long before anybody else, but also you're going to have people who are going to come from Ghana and Mali and Songhai. You're going to have people who today are from Ethiopia. So that it's important to know that, you know, even though you're talking about a people, the people geographically are located in many different areas. Well, the same thing is with the word Moor. We're using the word Moor as if there was a place, although it's called Morocco, and although there is a place, Mauritania, which is true, and although many of them settled in that area, the people that settled there came from various parts of Africa. And so these are the people that you're going to be looking at. So it becomes important is there another computer that can be used? Because I have this on flash drive. When you look at this, and if we could just get that, and then I'll show you the map again, you know, once we get things connected. But class number 2 dealt with the Mediterranean basin. Mm-hmm. And it took the idea of the origin of life in Africa to the next level. Mm-hmm. The next class that we're going to do today is going to look at, and there's a lot that I really have to read from because I want to get this right, and I don't want to speak extemporaneously because there are things that we really do have to talk about as it relates to who the people of North Africa are, because there's such confusion now with North Africa. Because the people that we're looking at now are not the people that were there back then. Mm. But because they're there now, and because we're looking at them now, we think they were always there. Mm-hmm. It's like if we looked at the United States of America today and believed that the people that we look at who are in control were always here. No more than 500 years have the people we see here now been here. It's like a history book written with peoples of European descent being the original Americans. The same is true for North Africa today. That's not the way in which the people looked. Mm-hmm. That is going to come, the Great Migration is going to come around 630 to 700 AD. with the movement of this new religion, because when Islam was first founded, it wasn't a religion. It was a way of life. And to understand Islam, you have to go up into the mountains of Ethiopia. And you have to understand who Bilal was. And you have to understand who the concept of Prophet Muhammad was. Not going to get controversial. I'll just leave all that alone for right now. But the idea is that Islam was the result of years of the failure of being able to capture the imaginations of African people through what is now going to be Roman Catholicism. And they're just not going to buy it. And in the 300s, you're going to have a Council of Nicaea, where the two parts, the Eastern Orthodox and the Western Orthodox, are going to be threatened. We're talking about so-called Christianity is going to be threatened. And Constantine, the emperor, is going to call a conference to square things away about 332 AD. The African contingent is believing that the Jesus, the Christ that they're talking about, was a human being that was supernatural and extraordinary. 2 words. Supernatural. Natural, but had mastered the world around him to a point where he seemed like he had touched on and become nature. That is what all the priests and priestesses of ancient Africa were always trying to become. One with nature. And Jesus the Christ, coming out of the order of Melchizedek, according to their discussions, came and mastered these different crafts, these different teachings, and he was a healer, an African healer. If you go back to about 152 BC, there was a brother by the name of Yeshua de Pantera, who was part of the Panther clan. This is why when we talk about Panthers, we have to take this understanding to a whole nother level. There's a written piece known as the Physiologus. 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 And the Physiologus is a treatise on the early Christian church. That when the early fathers like Clement and Augustine and others were developing the philosophy of this choristic revelation, they decided to change all of the African natural symbols, which were netures, into representations of Roman men. This is the Physiologus. And Google it. Don't believe a word I say.
I know that's
Check this out for yourself. Physiologus. Physiologus. Now, the panther is a very interesting animal in the animal kingdom. It has what's known as sweet breath. It can go into a sleep in its lair and then come out of the sleep and yawn, and the sweet breath attracts the animals. And the panther has dinner for the night. There's a book called The Perfumed Panther by Anne Gurick. It's called The Perfumed Panther. See, family, we have to understand exactly how to put this together in a way that it makes a lot of sense. Fantastic.
Okay, we probably would have to get everyone to move up because it's not feeding to this one.
Okay.
If you can't see.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good. I just.
Okay, so remember in Egypt they used the leopard skin as a symbol of the priesthood.
That's right.
Okay, the priests and priestesses wore leopard skins. But they got that practice from inner Africa where Africans in Puanit, Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Sudan, the Kushites wore panther skins. That's why you have Yeshua de Pantera, the Panther clan. Because the Panther clan was the original priesthood. All cats have the last name Pantera. Lion is Leo Pantera. The jaguar is Unca Pantera. But Pantera, and that's why Bastet, the black cat, was the symbol. And that is why it is superstitious for you to let a black cat cross your path. Because they're trying to keep your mind off the fact that that black cat is sacred, and you should hope that a black cat does cross your path, because that's going to be good luck. If anything, not bad luck. But see, they play with your head. So everything they want you to avoid thinking about to assume your greatness is what they tell you is the most horrible thing you could deal with. So we create superstitions, believing that black cats are bad luck, when black cats are good luck. And they're the original spiritual system. So, what did the early fathers of this church do? They took the panther, the symbol of the panther, and all of the attributes of the panther, they gave to Jesus Christ. They gave him the sweet word that draws people to him. And they gave all the characteristics of the Black Panther as a netcher, female netcher by the way, to Jesus the Christ. Physiologists, don't believe me. Read this and study this for yourself. Get that book, Annick Guerrer, G-U-E-R-E-R, Annick, A-N-N-I-C-K. Annick Guerrer. It's called The Perfumed Panther. Her name? A-N-N-I-C-K, Annick Guerrer, G-U-E-R-E-R. If I get a hold of it in my library, I will bring it in. I have to look for that one. But this is written. This basically is the understanding of where we are as a people. And so when we're looking at the Mediterranean and what African people brought to the world, this basically is the map that we're looking at. Okay, this is the northern part of Africa, going into Libya, Egypt. Up here in Tunis, the country we today call Tunis, that is where Carthage is. Now remember who the Carthaginians are, the Carthagians. The Carthagians are coming up out of the Phoenicians. That's where Punic War came from the word Phoenicia. Phoenicia. And so these Africans are developing here, and over here in Lebanon, you have the other sex. See, Phoenicians were not a nation of people. Phoenicians basically were a conglomeration of traders and merchants. But the base of them were African people that other people joined. The original Phoenicians. And the word comes from the color purple. Because purple is a symbol of royalty. And when you go to the Greeks and the Romans and to the Kemites, you'll see that purple is what the senators wore. So purple becomes a valued color. But why would purple be a valued color? Because it's the last color on the rainbow. When you ascend out of your infrared and ultraviolet, you move into this next level, which returns back to the perfect black. So purple becomes that last phase before you ascend into the spiritual domain. It's symbolic, but it's also scientific because purple is infrared. I'm sorry, infrared and ultraviolet. And so you have the ultraviolet rays. And when you deal with ultraviolet, you're dealing with the sun, ultraviolet A, B, and C. So you're dealing with all these concepts and these symbols which become important for us to understand. The word Phoenicia, coming from the word purple, is why they were called Phoenicians, because they dealt in the color purple. But what's also very important to understand about Phoenicia and the one in Lebanon is that the capital when you're in this part of the world, you're dealing with an ancient kingdom, and the capital of this kingdom was known as Byblos, Byblos, and they also traded in paper. And the Greeks, getting the Shabaka stone and the pyramid text, reading the coffin text, and reading the books from Alexandria, rewrote what they were studying. Because the first Bible was written in Greek. That's why I'm wondering, why isn't anybody asking, why is the first Bible written in Greek? Nobody will answer that question for you. The first Bible is written in Greek. And that is because that's all of the stolen legacy that the Greeks took, the African writings, and what did they call the book? They named it after the place where they got the paper to write it on.
Mm-hmm. But the Greeks never really had back then institutions. They did not have an alphabet. It was the Kemetic of the Egyptians which gave the Greeks an alphabet. They were the only learned people on the planet, and they created the three forms of writing, the phonetic, the hieroglyphic, and they gave the Greeks an alphabet and a writing. The Greeks could not write and read.
That's right.
In Greek, because the Greek did not have an alphabet until the Africans created it.
That's right. And there it is. And again, I teach many different classes all week long, so if I'm repeating myself, please work with me. But for people who are new to the class, they wouldn't have seen this over the last two classes. You talk about Walter Williams. This comes out of Walter Williams' book.
Right.
The African Origins of Christianity.
And Islam.
And, well, Islam is the second book.
Yes.
This comes directly out of his book. And this shows you Medunetta here, and then it shows how they took the script out of the symbol of the vulture, and how they then brought it to the next level, because they said, well, like, drawing is great, but if every time I want to say something I have to draw a vulture, how about if I just take a piece of the vulture out, and that becomes the symbol of the sound ak, is what they call the vulture, ak. Okay? Now, the Greeks then took that symbol and they developed that symbol. And then they took it through its forms, and then here's the Latin. And what Latin did was they created uppercase and lowercase. See, there's no reason for vowels in language. The reason why you have vowels is to separate consonants. Your consonants are the hard sounds. Cake. Okay? Cake. Well, the A between, it allows you to differentiate cake from cuck. So you play with a sound that has you open mouth. A, E, I, O, U. Vowels. So vowels put between hard letters create sounds that create words that create communications. Now, I wanted to take it a little bit further because I wanted to show you where the Egyptians got it from. And so here it comes out of The Art of Writing Hieroglyphics by Kwasi Milton. Kwasi Milton, Milton, where he shows you how not only was it Egyptian, but it goes back to Coptic, and then the relationship between Coptic symbols and numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And so Greek didn't have an alphabet. Greek's alphabet is a using, they use another African. That's why when you have that Rosetta Stone, and they said that's what cracked the code. You had hieroglyphics or Medunetta on the top, then you had the hieratic in the middle, and then you had what they call classical Greek on the bottom. And what allowed them to crack the code was that there were people who didn't understand hieroglyphic, didn't understand Hieratic, but there were scholars that understood classical Greek. But that's not classical Greek. That's another form of an African language that the Greeks adopted. English isn't a language. French isn't a language. Spanish isn't a language. Italian isn't a language. Because to have a language in the purest sense of the word, you have to have a script that is specific to that language. English uses Greek script. Spanish uses Greek script. Italian uses Greek script. German uses Greek script. To say that these languages are languages is like saying Europe is a continent. Because the major dominant force said it is, we have to believe it is. Also, not to get the answer wrong on the test. They force you in their testing to tell a lie.
That's right.
Because a continent is a large landmass surrounded on all sides by water. But when you look at Europe, of which Turkey is the protuberance, that's what sticks out, Turkey does. Europe is a peninsula. It's not a continent. A continent is surrounded on all sides by water. And Europe is only surrounded on 3 sides by water. Europe is a peninsula. Saudi Arabia is a peninsula. Turkey is a peninsula. Spain and Portugal is a peninsula. But they're not a continent. But because they say they are. You know what they say? You know, like if the horse had written the story, he would have been the hero. You know, not the guy that ran on him and said, the British are coming. You know, because the horse said, I'm the one that got you through the town, man. You were yelling and screaming, but I'm the one that got you through. So the horse was the hero. But it's according to who tells the story, who the hero is going to be. And this is what we're experiencing as a people. We're experiencing a story that is so untrue and so lacking of evidence of what it is that they're saying. And it's very sad, not that they say it, but that we believe it. But then it's time to wake up. So the Mediterranean. Okay, now. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at these maps. Today's class is dealing with North Africa. And what becomes important is when you're looking at North Africa, this is going to be the area. This is going to be the area that's going to become extremely important for us. Okay. This is a map that what you want to look at real close is that these people right here, the Garamantes, these are the people that are going to move up the Hapi and are going to settle in this area. These are the ancient people. All of these individuals are ancient Africans. Now, what's important is that look at where they're living. Today, this is the Sahara. So it's important that we realize that the Sahara at one time, as we know, was not a desert. And that it was green, and it was plush, and it grew vegetation and fruits and vegetables. What some people say happened was during the Ice Age, the fourth Ice Age, which brought great cold to the northern climate. To other parts of North Africa, it brought horrendous rains. And this is why they're saying about the Sphinx, that the Sphinx body is different from the head, and that there's actual marks of water that eroded, that the Sphinx actually was underwater for thousands of years. And because of that, you know, for those of you who are more into agricultural, when the soil is seeped in water, this northern area got a lot of rain, heavy rain, you know, all the time. And so the ground became very soggy, but it was still hot. And so over hundreds and hundreds of years, the soaking of the land and the grass and everything, eventually with the heat, killed the fertility of the land, killed the grass, killed it in terms of its life system, and eventually it dried up and became a desert. And so that's where a lot of people believe that the desert came from. However, there were people living here. And so what they decided to do was, well, we're not going to move. Because they had created lively trade going from Eastern to West Africa. So they said, so why should we stop? You know, we've got good trade going on. So what did they do? They started to build underground. And they would travel underground. And then they would come up for fresh air and for food. And being intelligent as they were, they said, well, in these areas where we come up, what are we going to build? Oases. So they built spots that they could continue their travel and then come up for fresh air, water, feed the animals. And the evidence of it is that there are animals underground. In fact, they have done x-rays of North Africa, and they've seen that there are tunnels that go from East to West Africa. Some people even say that's where the subway system came from. The idea of building underground like that. Because where in Europe do you have underground tunnels? So where would they automatically get these ideas, this idea from? Well, these were things that came to light as time went on. Now, a lot more work has to be done in this, fam, so I'm not necessarily saying that this is exactly how it has to be, but there's a lot of work that has to be done. But there are things that we do know. The one thing we do know is that if you take x-rays of North Africa, there are tunnels underground. We know if you go to Egypt, there are tunnels. I remember going in one of the temples, and we were walking underground, and there was a point where I had to stop because I was traveling too far, and I didn't know where I was going. And I was traveling, so I thought I was going to get back up in New York after that. So, this is these are twin pictures of the northern part of Africa that are going to show you, in this one over here, this is ancient Nubia. Ancient Nubia during the medieval period. Ancient Nubia during the medieval period. See, this dispels the concept of Africa and Africans. And it becomes important to know that what we today call Nubia was flourishing. It was coming up out of Meroe. It was coming up out of civilizations. It may not have been on the same level, but it certainly did hold together Dongala, Alwa, Makuria, Nobadia. These are all ancient places that are in medieval Nubia, which medieval, you're dealing basically with from 500 to about 1000 AD. This now is looking at Tasseti and Kemet, and the oldest kingdoms dealing with Tasseti here, which includes Kustal, Kerma, and Aswan. Here you have, now here's the what I told you about the Almoravids. These were the second dynasty that ruled the Moors. You'll find out more about this next class. Fourth class, we're going to do an overview of the Moors. But these are the Almoravids. So when you get down here, you're right here, this is Mali here. This is the Niger River. Gao, Timbuktu, in this area here. Up here, you're dealing with Burkina Faso. You're dealing with parts of West Africa and Northwest Africa when you come up in here. Here's Morocco. Okay, Ceuta is here. Now, Ceuta is going to be very important next class. It's the tip of Morocco. In fact, if you're in Ceuta, you can see Spain across the waters. You could see Spain across the waters like you can see New York from New Jersey. That's how close it was. Here is the other map that I showed you before. What I want to focus on is over here in what might be called Morocco. You had Numidia. Okay? Over here in Tunis, Tunis, you have Carthage. Remember, this is the Mediterranean basin right here. All this area here is the Mediterranean. This is all Kushite. These are all Africans here for hundreds of years that are either going to leave this area and go there, or they're just going to stay. But this is how this whole area got peopled. But I want to focus on Carthage. I want to focus on Numidia, and I also want to focus on the Garamantes. That's class number 3. Is the Garamantes. Okay, now to do that, I want to talk to you about certain articles. The first article that I want to talk to you about is an article that was written by Dana Reynolds. It's called The African Heritage and Ethno-History of the Moors. Background to the emergence of early Berber and Arab peoples from prehistory to the Islamic dynasties. And as you can see, I have to, for those that wanted to get these, I have to send them to you in 4 pieces, because each one of these has pictures, and it takes me beyond the 25 megabytes that I can send. So I had to break this essay up into 4 parts. What I want to look at is an overview of Carthage. And again, you have the map there. But the key is it'll show you pictures for now for the time. I just want to show you. These are pictures. Anybody know how I can turn this around? Normally in view it has rotate,
Right.
but I don't see rotate here. But I don't want to waste time looking. But this page right here deals with Phoenicia, Israel, Palestine. And it's a 9th century BC piece. Here again is Phoenicia. Because you have to understand, Phoenicia, Lebanon, and Israel, and Carthage, these are both the same people. This is the Phoenician people who are traders and merchants, who on one end of the Mediterranean, in Israel or in Palestine, They have a trade going on, and then they have it's like having a company in one city and the same company in another city. That's who the Phoenicians were, but the base of them are African people. So when I show you pictures of these Phoenicians in Israel, they're going to be related to the Phoenicians in Carthage. And there's a picture of what the city actually looked like at its height, Carthage. This is what Carthage looked like at its height. And some of the mausoleums that were built coming up out of Africa. That was in Numidia. Okay. So we're going to talk about that. To go along with this, what I want to do is I want to talk to you about Hannibal. Because to understand Carthage, you have to understand Hannibal and the Africanness of Hannibal. Hannibal Barca, son of Hamilcar Barca. And again, another very sad story, but it's just part of what brings down great civilizations. And then I wanted to include an article by J.A. Rogers coming out of his book, World's Great Men of Color, dealing with Hannibal. And then what becomes important is to look at Numidia and looking at this man, Massinissa. Massinissa is going to become a very important person. Because remember earlier I told you that when the Romans and the Phoenicians or the Carthaginians were in war, well, the other part of the story that Robin Walker tells us is that there was a lot of competition between the Numidians and the Carthaginians, two African people. There were many Numidians in the army of the Carthaginians. And basically, it is said that the Carthaginians did not treat the Numidians properly. Massinissa is a man that's going to be in love with a particular woman. And the Carthaginians are going to give the woman in marriage to somebody else. And this is not going to make Massinissa very happy. And eventually it's going to make him turn on the Carthaginians. And that's what's going to let the Romans win. Because the Numidians went from being on the Carthaginian side to the Roman side. That's sad, isn't it? Who knows what would have happened in history had Massinissa married the sister? Who knows what would have happened in history if in so many other cases, if Boabdil was able to get along with his family, the last great Moorish king of Granada. What brought Granada down is there was infighting amongst Africans. There was infighting amongst the Almoravids, the West Africans, and the people who were in Spain and Portugal. We have to learn that to survive, we have to stick together. We can have as many differences as we want with each other, but we have to learn how to stick together because we have a larger enemy out there, and that larger enemy is the essence that's splitting us apart, separating us, and then eventually the Romans are going to overtake the Numidians. So it's not even like the Numidians got anything out the deal. They eventually were overtaken by the Romans. And that's how the Romans got into Africa and eventually would get into Egypt by 30 BC. So this basically is how I want to approach looking at this, discussing these pieces. This is the readings for us. And then we're going to end up talking about the Punic Wars. And this is the map. Again, remembering that first map that I showed you. This map and this map is the same. This map, North Africa, here's Egypt, Israel, Lebanon, North Africa coming down the west coast. And this map, same thing. What you're looking at here is in the Punic Wars, basically minus 265, 264 BC. Right here, you're looking at Rome is up here, Carthage. These are all African territories here. All this area here. And this is what Rome is coming down. The Romans basically are a nomadic, barbaric people who are basically Germanic in nature, coming up out of the countries that we call Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden. They're going to travel down south, and they're going to overcome every civilization they come upon. Eventually, these same people are the ones that are going to override in 500 AD, these same another Germanic wave of these brothers and sisters from Rome, their brothers and sisters going to be another wave of people, and they're going to be the ones that are going to sack the Holy Roman Empire. They're going to be known as the Visigoths and the Vandals. We'll talk about them next class. But they're all the same people. They're all the Germanic people coming from the north. They're barbaric. They have nothing to offer the society, so they just overtake it, and they try to take whatever they possibly can get. And that is what is going to come down into Africa, coming down this way. The Persians are going to come in 525. The Greeks are going to come in 332. The Romans are going to come in 30 BC. And Eurasians that call themselves Muslims from the Eurasian parts of the East call themselves, they're going to convert to Islam. And these are the ones that are going to come into Egypt about 640, 680 AD. And they're still there now. These are the people that have created the misnomer, the Middle East. Okay, these are going to be Eurasians. So from 525 BC with Cambyses, Persian, Africa, that was the 25th dynasty. That was Taharqa. The fall of Taharqa brought these individuals on. And they're going to continue to come down and to travel from the Ice Ages. And these are the people that are, the Moors are going to be pushing back in eventually. And this right here is what's going to become, except it's going to have a little bit more up here. But next week when we talk, you'll see that Al-Andalusia, eventually, the area that the Moors are going to take in Spain and Portugal, this is going to be the mountains, Guadarrama mountains here. The Ebro River is here. It's going to come down the south coast, come around, and it's going to go across into Portugal. This part of Portugal is going to be the area where you heard about Prince Henry the Navigator. Okay, that is where Prince Henry the Navigator is going to learn navigation from the Moors. And they're going to start to travel over to West Africa. And that's going to be in 1482. You're going to see Christopher Columbus in West Africa with the Portuguese. In 10 years before 1492, Christopher Columbus is with the Portuguese because he's married to Portuguese. Everything he does up until 1490 is with the Portuguese. But with the fall of the Moors and everything going to Isabella and Ferdinand, Castile and Aragon, the two principalities, he's going to say, well, I'm on the wrong team now. So he's going to change teams from the Portuguese to the Spaniards. And that's where he's going to get his money to come to America. Because he already knows that there's land here. And he knows it because of his relationship with the Portuguese, who were coming and understanding with the West Africans that there was land to the west. Any questions? Comments? It's 4:57. So let me just move through this. This is there are certain things that I think that we should know about this.
Professor, forgive me.
Please.
What's a Persian? Where does a Persian come from? You said the Persians came in.
Persians are the ancient Persians is the country we today call Iran. Before they were European, they were called. It was the kingdoms of Media, Media. These were African kingdoms there. The original Iranians were Africans. Again, the reason why we did that piece with the Ice Age is because that's very important. Dr. Diop talks about a northern cradle and a southern cradle. The northern cradle are the Africans that are going to go into the north and get caught in the Ice Age. The 51st parallel. The southern lands are going to remain what we call the pigmented area of African people. They're both the same people. But because of the Ice Age, one of them has to go through a metamorphosis, has to go through a morphological, physiological change in order to survive. The depigmentation of the African was a blessing, because they could never have survived being pigmented in that cold climate. No more than we can survive. That's why we lighten up around this time. We're going to get a little dark in a couple months, but the idea is that weather and climate impacts your pigment process.
That's right.
And so in the depigmentation process of the African, and in the hair changing its texture, and in the body parts changing, it actually was a blessing. Because that's what allowed the African to be able to survive and to live. The problem was it also impacted his mind.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came back very hostile. He came back very angry and jealous, envious. And he caused havoc on the southern lands. And he's been doing it ever since. It's still going on now.
He actually became his environment. In order to survive,
That's right.
he had to become the environment
That's right.
that sustained him. And that environment was cold, frigid, stingy, selfish,
Yes.
and destructive.
Yes.
And he hated it.
Yes.
And he hated it today.
Yes. That's right.
He's still the same character.
That's right. And you see, as African people, our observation of this, if we're just and understanding of it, we can deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
We can understand the parameters of what we're living in. Nobody wants to live in that type of weather. It was hostile. And the image of your creator can only be as great or less than the environment in which you're living in. So when you're living in a very hostile, cold, angry environment that's very stingy, that doesn't give you the fruits and the vegetables and all the things, then you become that way too, because your environment is very covetous of its creations. It doesn't share with you. And whatever you have, it still want more from you. And so in the mind of this African, this is the characteristics that built the mind of this individual. And so when he comes back down south, he's coming back down south with a calcified pineal gland.
Mm-hmm. He's also very cunning, had to be to survive.
Yes.
To overtake whatever little animals he could find. And Dr. Clarke, or was it Dr. Clarke, used to say that, oh, Dr. Jeffries, if you in your cave saw a rabbit and y'all ran out and happened to run the rabbit down, you're not running up to the next cave and holler, y'all come on, we got a rabbit here, let's have a party. No, if you see anybody from the other cave coming, you call your relatives, your boys, and everybody come with the club, and they take on war with the people who coming down to share the rabbit with you. And so that was the development of their country, their culture. The strongest survives. The strongest become the leader.
Yes.
And they are just like Trump. They didn't think it through. They bang it through.
And think about what they're talking about as it relates to we're going to have to look at the meaning of lies. That I saw an article where they're saying that we are going to have to condition ourselves to understand that what is a lie to him is actually the truth from his perspective. That we are going to have to adjust ourselves to what truth is. Think about that though.
We always did that.
See, realize what they're saying to us. And going back to what Minister Brown is saying about that environment up there. That environment up there justified that you say, hey, don't worry about it, man. Okay, so you got that rabbit, all right. But the moment you turn your back, they are justified in knocking you on your head and taking that rabbit. Because the environment has created the condition that we don't have to tell the truth. This is what indigenous people meant when they talked about the idea of the forked tongue. These are conditions that a universal southern world that had its saints and sinners now, because I'm not going to paint a beautiful picture. We were going through our own changes. But the idea is that you're living in a society right now that is coming full face with what was going on during the feudal system. You have to look very close at what's happening between people and Russia and understand that there's something else going on as it relates to the attempt at developing a relationship with Russia. There's something they're trying to protect.
Yes. Right.
There's a reason why they're doing what they're doing. Because they realize they're the last bastion. The time is up now. And Putin is saying, look, you want to survive? I want to survive. We got to come together. The same enemies you have are the enemies that we have.
That's correct.
And that was happening amongst the Moors also, but the Moors just never realized. What Sister Reynolds does as she goes through her essay is she begins to identify the people that are going to be in North Africa. And she's going to talk about the different words that come to us: Moran, Moroi, Morini, Moro, Morelli, Moran, Mormon, Swarthmore. All of these are words that are going to come out of this particular period. But what she does is she wants to go back. The Arab is known to the Greeks and Romans. The Arabs were, the Arabic word Hadara is where the word Arab comes from. It means black. Hadara. Hadhara. Hadara. I mispronounced it. And when they described what the people would look like, they said the peoples of Chad basically were the ones that would have been Hadhara. The original Arabs. Now, to understand this, you could go to an essay by Wayne Chandler in The African Presence in Early Asia. He has a really great essay on the early Arabian Peninsula, where he talks about the original Arabs and the idea of the kingdom of Saba, S-A-B-A, which was a kingdom that had part of its kingdom was on the east coast of Saudi Arabia and on the west coast of Saudi Arabia, including Yemen and the east coast of Ethiopia. and it was called Saba, S-A-B-A, and the people were known as Sabaeans. And this was an African nation. Now the other thing is, remember what we said about Ceuta. Ceuta, you could see Spain from Ceuta. Well, if you're on the easternmost coast of Ethiopia, you can see Yemen or Saudi Arabia. So these are very close areas where people could just go across the water, just like we go across the Hudson River. Well, they could do the same thing. So the idea first is to look at who the Arabs were to the Greeks and Romans.